Story 1. When we first moved into apartment 4B, the walls were too quiet. That kind of silence never feels right. It waits, holding its breath, like something inside is listening. At the time, I was too busy unpacking boxes and keeping my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, from turning the empty closets into forts. My wife, Sarah, was thrilled about finally finding a place near her new job. We were tired, hopeful, and broke. The apartment wasn't perfect. It smelled faintly of bleach and something sour beneath it, but it was cheap, and the landlord swore the last tenants had moved out suddenly, leaving most of their furniture behind. We should have taken that as a warning. The first whisper came just after midnight. I woke up thinking the television was on. The sound wasn't clear, just low murmurs like a radio tuned between stations. When I sat up, the noise stopped. Sarah was asleep beside me, her shallow breathing the only sound. I waited for a moment, then leaned closer to the wall next to the bed. Nothing. Silence again. I told myself it was pipes. Old buildings always have them. But the next night, the whispers came again, louder this time. They stretched through the wall, a jumble of words floating in and out of each other, like a dozen lips trying to speak at once. I pressed my ear to the wall. This time, the words came through clearly. Don't let her sleep near the windows. I froze. The voice was soft, female, and close, like she was standing right behind the plaster. I jerked back so fast I almost fell off the bed. Sarah muttered something about bad dreams, rolled over, and kept sleeping. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I checked the other side of that wall. It belonged to apartment 4A, supposedly empty. The landlord said no one had rented it yet. Still, I knocked on the door that morning. No answer. By the third night, Sarah had started hearing them too. They whispered her name first, soft, drawn out, then mine. Sometimes the voices sounded like our own, repeating fragments of our conversations in a slow, eerie echo. Other times they said things we didn't understand, names, dates, snatches of pleas. And sometimes, between the chaos of whispers, I caught a single word. Murdered. Lily started waking up screaming around that time. She said a lady in the wall kept asking her, "Where's the baby?" A week later, after Sarah left for work, I decided to find where the sound came from. When I pressed my ear to the wall between our bedroom and Lily's, the whispers were stronger. I tapped it and felt a hollow space behind it. Curiosity and fear twisted together inside me. By noon, I had a hammer in my hand. Behind the plaster, there was another wall, older, chipped, and covered in dark handprints, as if someone had clawed at it. Between the two layers of wall, I found a small gap running the length of the bedroom. The smell hit me first, rotting wood and moldy fabric. Inside the cavity lay a bundle of what looked like children's drawings, yellowed and crusted in one corner. They showed a stick-figure family inside our exact apartment. In every drawing, black scribbles filled the walls. On the bottom corner of one picture, written in shaky pencil, "They scream with us." That evening, the whispers changed tone. No longer random, no longer confused. They chanted softly, in rhythm with each creak of the old floorboards. And then they started describing us. What we were doing, what we were wearing, even what we were thinking. 2 nights later, Sarah slipped while washing dishes and sliced her palm open. The same voice that had warned about the window whispered, just like before. That made me snap. I shouted at the wall, demanding to know who they were, what they wanted. The reply came instantly. "We want to be remembered." That night, the whispers turned into weeping. I didn't tell Sarah what I'd found in the wall. She already looked pale, tired, and hollow-eyed from sleepless nights. But then the whispers began speaking directly to her in my voice, telling her things I never said, that I wanted to leave her, that I wanted to take Lily away. She stopped trusting me. I'd catch her watching me with fear in her eyes as the whispers laughed from the walls. It was around midnight again when Lily's voice woke me, except it wasn't coming from her room. It came from the wall. "Daddy, the lady says we can stay forever." I ran into her room. She wasn't there. Only her doll sat on the bed, its porcelain face half shattered. The whispering was so loud now it felt like dozens of mouths pressed right against the plaster. I tore at the wall with my bare hands, splinters cutting my fingers, until the sheetrock broke. Behind it was an old hollow space, barely wide enough for a person. In the dim light, I saw movement, a small shape pressed deep inside. I reached in, trembling, only to grab air. Then something cold touched my wrist and whispered, "She's already with us." When I turned around, the apartment had gone utterly silent. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath again. I never found Lily. The police said she'd run away, that I'd imagined the rest under stress. But every night since, I still hear her laugh through the walls, along with the others. Sometimes they whisper in unison. They've learned my name now too. And lately, they've started using my voice. Story 2. When children talk to imaginary friends, adults smile and say it's normal. I did too, until my daughter's friend started answering back. The first time I heard the second voice, it came from her room at night, a faint, breathy whisper behind her laughter. I froze outside her door. It wasn't the TV, and it wasn't my imagination. It was something else. At first, I tried to believe it was harmless. I was a single dad doing my best after the divorce, and moving into this small apartment was a desperate choice. The rent was low, the place came furnished, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. I should have wondered why. My daughter Emma was 6. Bright, imaginative, always drawing strange shapes on the walls with crayons. She'd wave at corners, whisper to the empty air, then giggle like someone had told her a secret. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" I'd ask. "Tommy," she said once, pointing to the narrow closet by her bed. "He stays in there when the lights are off. He says the dark feels better." I laughed it off. Maybe Tommy was her way of adjusting to the new place. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wake to gentle tapping, like fingernails brushing wood. When I checked her room, she'd be sound asleep, closet door open just a crack. A week after we moved in, I found small handprints on the wall near the ceiling, too high for Emma to reach. I scrubbed them off, but by the next morning, they were back. This time, there were more of them, overlapping, like different children had pressed their hands there. That same night, I heard laughter. 2 voices now, both young, both too close to the wall. I stood by Emma's door, afraid to look in, afraid to admit what I already knew. The laughter stopped suddenly, replaced by a whisper. "Don't let him see us." I shoved open the door. Emma was alone, fast asleep. The light flickered, and the cold hit, an unnatural chill that rolled from the closet like a breath. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps, bare feet running down the hallway. I rushed out, calling Emma's name. Silence. Her bedroom door was open. The closet stood wide. She was gone. Every instinct screamed she was hiding, playing some twisted game, but the apartment was small. I checked under the bed, behind the curtains, inside the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. Then I noticed something strange near the floor vent beside her bed, tiny fingerprints smeared in dust. I unscrewed the vent cover and saw a dark space stretching behind the walls, too deep for a normal crawl space. The smell that came from inside was old and foul, like forgotten earth. I called the police. They searched the entire building. No Emma, no signs of forced entry. Just more of those handprints, faint but clearly visible inside the crawl spaces. One officer, a tired, middle-aged man, went pale when he shone his light deeper into the vent. Later, he told me he'd seen what looked like small bones wedged deep in the wall, but when they brought tools to open it, the space was empty. He didn't come back after that night. 2 days later, a detective named Ruiz came to see me. He looked uneasy, holding a file folder close. "You're not the first parent to lose a kid here," he said quietly. He showed me faded reports, missing children from the same building going back nearly 50 years. Every case was the same, no sign of struggle, no clue where they'd gone. All of them vanished from their bedrooms. The building's original owner, a man named Thomas Greaves, had been arrested decades ago for child abduction, but died before trial. They never found the bodies. His apartment? The same one Emma and I lived in. I asked if they thought he'd buried them here. Ruiz shook his head. "We think he kept them, somehow." That night, I couldn't stay away from her room. I sat on the floor by the closet, listening. Hours passed, then tap, tap, tap. "Emma?" I whispered. Something scraped from deep inside the vent. I crawled closer. A voice, small and trembling, came from the dark. "Daddy! He won't let me out!" I dropped the flashlight. My heart pounded as I reached into the vent. The air was freezing. My fingers brushed something soft, tiny fingers gripping mine, then more hands joined hers, dozens of them, cold, fragile, pulling. I screamed and yanked back, tearing my hand free. The vent cover slammed shut on its own. When I turned the light back on, dozens of small handprints had appeared across the wall, smeared like they'd been pressed from the inside. I left that night, driving aimlessly until dawn. When I returned, the apartment door stood open. The police had sealed it earlier, but now it gaped wide, as if welcoming me back. Inside, everything was untouched, except Emma's room. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in charcoal drawings, children standing together, their eyes hollow circles. In the middle of them was me, drawn in messy black scribbles, reaching for something I couldn't touch. At the bottom of the wall, scrawled in my daughter's small handwriting, "We're happy now. Tommy says thank you." They never found Emma, but when night falls and the wind rattles through the vents of any old building, sometimes I still hear her laugh inside the walls. And now sometimes they whisper my name too. Story 3. It started with a single dark drop, landing on my pillow right next to my face. I remember waking up to the strange smell, something metallic, sharp, like old coins soaked in rain. When I reached up and touched the stain, the surface of the ceiling above our bed was wet, not leaking water, something thicker, sticky. That small drop was the beginning of everything that went wrong inside apartment 9C. When Mia and I first saw the place, it looked perfect. High ceilings, bright rooms, and rent far smaller than it should have been for that part of the city. The landlord seemed eager to hand over the keys, barely letting us finish the viewing before he was pushing the lease in front of us. We didn't ask why. New beginnings make people foolish. The first few days were peaceful, though we both noticed how cold the bedroom felt compared to the rest of the apartment. Even when we shut the windows, the air there stayed damp, heavy. Mia said it smelled faintly like rust, but I told her it was probably the old pipes. A week later, I woke to that first red drop on the pillow. I tried to convince myself it was paint or maybe rust from the plumbing above. But when Mia noticed more dark spots forming across the ceiling, something inside me tightened. They spread overnight like bruises, expanding in odd, irregular shapes. We called the landlord the next morning. He promised to send maintenance, though no one ever came. The stains only grew darker, forming veins that seemed to pulse slightly when light hit them. "What kind of leak stains like that?" Mia asked one night. I didn't have an answer. By the third night, the ceiling began to drip. Small, thick drops of dark red liquid marked the floor, one after another, with a faint tapping sound that echoed through the room. The smell worsened. Iron, decay, something animal. We couldn't sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., I sat awake, watching a new droplet swell directly over Mia's head. It hung there like a teardrop, trembling, then fell silently onto her forehead. She woke screaming. Her hands were covered in the dark red substance, slick and warm. We ran to the bathroom, scrubbing our hands and faces. When we looked back, the ceiling was clean again, as if nothing had happened. Only the faint smell of iron remained. After that night, sleep became dangerous. Whenever we tried to rest in that room, vivid dreams took over. Dreams of strangers screaming behind walls, of blood seeping through wooden planks, of a woman crying softly from above. Mia woke with nosebleeds nearly every morning. I started having them too. We moved our mattress into the living room, hoping the distance would bring peace. But even from there, we could hear it, the faint dripping from behind the ceiling, steady and rhythmic. Frustration turned into obsession. I needed to know what was above us. The building's floor plan said there was no attic, yet when I tapped on the ceiling above the bedroom, the sound was hollow. I borrowed a ladder and cut through the plaster one afternoon, while Mia begged me to wait for the landlord. Behind the panel, darkness breathed out a wave of warmth that smelled unmistakably like rot and blood. Inside was a narrow attic space filled with cobwebs and broken furniture, and stains. So many stains, wide, dark patches that soaked into the old wooden boards, spreading down toward our ceiling. At first, I thought it was old water damage, but when my light caught something glinting in the corner, I saw what they really were. Chains, hooks, rusted tools crusted in dried brown red, a broken chair with straps. Something terrible had happened there. Mia found an old photograph buried under a pile of dust. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and a child, posing stiffly. Behind them, hanging from the ceiling, was a faint outline of those same chains. The photo's back had one line scribbled in ink. They never stopped dripping. That night, we tried to leave. The power went out just as we reached the front door. The handle refused to turn. Then came the dripping sound again, but not from the ceiling, from the walls, from the air vents, from every corner at once. The smell filled the apartment until I could taste it. Mia started screaming when blood began oozing from the light sockets, trailing down the walls like tears. The floor beneath us darkened, and I realized in horror that the liquid was seeping through from above. I looked up. The ceiling bulged outward, sagging as if something inside pressed against it. Then slowly it tore open, not with a crash, but with a wet, deliberate rip. Something fell through. It wasn't a person, not anymore. The shape was wrong, twisted, smooth like melted wax. It hit the floor and burst apart in a thick splash of red that sprayed across our walls. Mia fainted. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, before dragging her out. The landlord claimed later that he'd never even rented apartment 9C to anyone before us, said it had been condemned for years. The police found the attic space, but it was empty. No chains, no stains, nothing. We left, but sometimes at night, I still hear the dripping. Last week, a letter came from our old landlord. It was stained with something dark, the scent familiar. Only one sentence was written inside. You left too soon. They weren't done speaking to you. And that night, when I turned off the lights, a drop landed on my cheek. I looked up, trembling. The ceiling above my new bed was spotless, white and harmless, until I saw the faint red outline slowly spreading just above where I slept. Story 4. The first morning I smelled it, I thought something had died in the hallway. The air coming through my front door was thick and sour, carrying that unmistakable odor of rot and wet metal. I pressed my ear against the wood, half expecting to hear something moving on the other side. But the building was silent, too silent. That silence would become a companion I'd grow to fear more than the smell itself. I had moved into apartment 2B a week earlier, trying to start over after a bad breakup. The place was small and cheap, exactly what I could afford. It wasn't terrible at first, just old. The kind of building that creaked as if it remembered things you didn't. The manager, an older man with thin hair, warned me not to fuss about hallway noises. He said some neighbors were light sleepers, though I never saw anyone on my floor. The morning after I moved in, I noticed long, sharp scratches across my front door. They were fresh, deep enough to splinter the wood and flake off pale shavings onto the floor. I laughed nervously, thinking someone's dog had gotten loose. But that smell, metallic and warm, seeped from the cracks like breath. And when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. A few nights later, the smell grew stronger. I woke up dizzy, throat dry, my chest tight. The air tasted like rust. When I switched on the hall light, more claw marks had appeared. 5 long lines across the middle of the door, as if something had reached for the handle, but stopped. That night, I decided to check the building's security footage. I work remotely and had access to the maintenance camera system as part of the tenant portal. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the feed showed movement outside my door. A dark figure leaned close to the wood, its shape stretched wide, as if its arms were too long. I couldn't see a face. The video glitched, distorting the figure into stuttering fragments of static. It lingered for 6 long seconds, then vanished. I replayed it again and again until the screen began to buzz faintly, like a heart monitor losing rhythm. I told the manager. He stared at me with tired eyes and said flatly, "There shouldn't be footage at that hour. Those cameras shut off at 3 every night for resets." When I showed him the clip, he shook his head and muttered something about bad data, then left quickly, refusing to look at me again. That's when the isolation began to settle in. My phone calls dropped. My emails stopped sending. Even when I went outside, the hallways always seemed empty, like the building only existed for me. Some nights I knocked on other doors. No one ever answered. The smell never left. By the 3rd week, paranoia had set in fully. I stopped sleeping. Every night I'd sit awake on my couch, watching the door. The marks grew worse. New scratches appeared every morning, slashing through the numbers on the metal plate. One evening, I placed a small motion-activated camera facing the door from the inside. When it triggered at 3:17, I woke instantly. The camera showed the doorknob slowly turning back and forth, like a hand testing it gently. Then came the sound, a faint dragging, almost like nails scraping down the other side of the door. Then, a knock, not a human knock, too slow, too deliberate. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, followed by silence. When I pulled the door open seconds later, the hallway was empty, but a single black handprint stained the metal handle, wet and glistening. Desperate, I searched online for apartments with claw marks, then narrowed it down to my address. That's when I found a 10-year-old news article. The prior tenant of apartment 2B, a man named Chris Larkin, had been found murdered right outside his door, stabbed at 3:17 a.m. The article said police never caught the killer, only that witnesses heard scratching and a scream moments before he died. The photo in the article showed the same door I lived behind now, same number, same deep claw marks streaking down the wood. The landlord must have repainted over them years ago, but they were back. That night, I locked every bolt, pushed the couch against the door, and sat with a knife in my trembling hand. When the clock blinked 3:16 a.m., the air turned cold. The smell flooded the room again, stronger than ever. Then, 3 slow knocks. The door began to rattle. I saw the shadow through the gap beneath it, long fingers stretching, reaching. The sound of nails dragging against wood filled the apartment, and my security camera light blinked red. Through the shaking door, I heard a whisper. Faint. Familiar. "Open up, Chris." I froze. Nobody had called me that name before. "Open up. You have my face now." The syllables dragged like broken glass over metal. When the door finally burst inward, it didn't shatter, it melted. The wood splintered like skin tearing open. A dark, wet hand reached through the hole, fingers twitching, nails black as soot. They scraped across my chest, drawing lines of blood without pressure. Then everything went still. I woke on the floor, knife still in hand. The door looked pristine again. No marks, no blood, nothing. The clock read 7:45 a.m. I thought I'd dreamed it all until I saw the camera light blinking green. The last frame on the footage wasn't the door. It was my face, standing outside my own apartment, staring into the lens, whispering something I couldn't hear. And below the image, stamped by the system's clock, was the same time as before, 17 a.m. Story 5. It was the third night when the hallway refused to end. I remember walking toward the bathroom, half asleep, counting the steps as I always did, 7 from the bedroom to the door. But that night, after the 7th step, there was another door, then another. And when I turned around, the bedroom was gone. That was when I realized the apartment had changed again. My wife, Nina, and I had moved in with our son, Eric, just a month earlier. The apartment seemed perfect. Cheap rent, thick walls, and enough warmth to make us forget how old it was. Even the landlord seemed friendly, though his last words had bothered me. "You'll get used to the layout. It takes some time to understand how this place works." We laughed about it then. But now, I knew what he meant. At first, it was small things. A corridor appearing slightly longer, a door creaking from a different direction, the light switches no longer where they'd been. One night, Nina swore the kitchen window faced a different street than before. Another time, Eric's bedroom door led to the storage closet instead. We blamed the exhaustion of moving, the stress, maybe our minds playing tricks, until the third night. That night felt wrong from the moment I opened my eyes. The air was thick, humming faintly, almost alive. The alarm clock blinked an unreadable hour, its numbers tangled into gibberish. Nina was still asleep, but Eric wasn't in his bed. I walked into the hall, calling his name, and that's when the door behind me disappeared. The hallway stretched far ahead into a dim red glow. I started walking faster, heart pounding. Every few feet, new doors appeared, identical and silent. When I finally opened one, it wasn't Eric's room. It was our old house. The same wallpaper, the same kitchen table from years ago. And sitting there, eating cereal like time had never passed, was my mother. The problem was, she'd been dead for 7 years. She looked up, smiling faintly. "You're late for school again." Her voice cracked on the last word, looping in a distorted way, like a broken record. When I blinked, the room was gone, replaced again by the endless hall. My mother's voice followed me anyway. By the next evening, we were all falling apart. Nina said she saw me walking down the hall when I'd been sitting right beside her. Eric begged to leave, crying that the walls whispered to him at night. I agreed to leave too, but every time we tried to reach the front door, the apartment rearranged itself. The entrance would vanish, replaced by brick or blind corners. Windows no longer showed the city. Instead, they revealed strange, shifting landscapes, black skies, floating shapes, an ocean that glowed red beneath invisible lightning. Days stopped making sense. Sometimes the sun rose twice, sometimes not at all. We stopped knowing if we were awake or crying in dreams. One night, we found a new door we hadn't noticed before, just beside the kitchen. It opened into a large, empty room with walls painted in faded blue. Inside were boxes, hundreds of them, stacked to the ceiling. Curiosity pushed us to open one. Inside were our belongings. Old toys, clothes, even letters we'd lost years ago in another apartment. Every box contained something from a different point in our lives. Then I found one marked with today's date. Inside was Eric's shoe, soaked in fresh mud. We hadn't gone outside in days. The air in the room thickened, and the walls began to hum. Suddenly, the blue paint peeled away, revealing layers underneath, each painted wall showing a different time in our lives. Our first home, my mother's nursing room, the living room where Nina had once miscarried. Each layer was our life, peeled and rearranged into this impossible place. Eric disappeared that night. We heard his screams first, distant, echoing through walls that bent and warped. I ran toward them, but every step took me somewhere different. A hallway turning into the kitchen becoming a hospital corridor. Then I saw him. He stood at the end of the hall, staring at me, his face pale and hollow-eyed. Behind him, shadows ran along the walls, repeating our movements like dark reflections. Nina fell to her knees, begging them to stop as her voice echoed back, 5 seconds late, mocking her words. When I reached for Eric, the hallway folded inward. It didn't collapse or crumble. It breathed, inhaling us into darkness. I don't know how much time passed when I woke up again. Maybe hours, maybe years. The apartment looks normal now. Everything is back in its place. The furniture arranged neatly, the doors behaving, but Nina isn't speaking anymore. She just stands in the corner, tracing patterns on the wall. The same pattern I've started to see everywhere. The layout of the apartment. Eric's room is empty, but sometimes, when I walk past it at night, the door opens by itself, revealing a glimpse of light, a long hallway stretching infinitely ahead, and if I listen carefully, I can still hear him calling, from somewhere deep within the walls. Now I understand what the landlord meant. The apartment doesn't want us to leave. It wants us to remember. Every room it shows us is a piece of what we were, what we lost. Sometimes, I think the rooms are finally done shifting. Then I blink, and the hallway behind me extends again, endless, waiting. And as I walk forward, I hear my own voice whispering from the dark ahead. Welcome home. Story 6. It began with the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and always around midnight. We'd been living in apartment 4C for only a week when I first woke up to the sound. At first, I thought it was just our neighbor walking around. The floorboards creaked rhythmically. 2 steps. Pause. 3 more. But when I mentioned it to Claire the next morning, she frowned. There's no one above us, she said. Remember what the landlord told us? The top floor's been empty for years. Her words sat heavy in my stomach, but I laughed it off. Old buildings make weird noises. Pipes. Wind. The usual excuses people give themselves when they're a little scared of something they can't explain. But the next night, the footsteps returned. And that time, something else came with them. The pattern became routine. Around 11:57 every night, faint thuds began from the ceiling, like shoes dragging across dusty boards. Then came muffled voices. I could never make out distinct words, but the tone was always strained and low, like 2 people arguing in the next room. Claire started recording it on her phone. When we played the audio back, we heard a soft chime buried under the voices. A spoon, maybe? Or a glass knocking against wood, and in between the murmurs, what sounded like a weak, dry cough. By the 5th night, we couldn't ignore it anymore. I climbed the stairwell to the locked door of apartment 5C, our mysterious upper neighbor. The door was heavy, gray, and sealed with a thick layer of dust. A vacant notice hung crooked above the peephole. No light escaped through the crack at the bottom, no smell except the faint trace of iron and mold. I knocked once. The footsteps stopped immediately. We tried to sleep early after that, but sleep never came easily. Claire started complaining that she could feel someone walking overhead even after the noises stopped, tiny vibrations traveling through the ceiling beams. Then, one night, I woke to find her staring at the ceiling. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Above us, stretched across the plaster, were 2 tall, elongated shadows, human silhouettes. They moved back and forth in slow, oddly synchronized motions. No light in our room could have cast them, and even when I shut off the bedside lamp, the shadows stayed. One of them lifted what looked like an arm, pointing toward the bed. That was the first night we slept on the couch. Curiosity eventually overcame fear. I asked our landlord directly, an older man named Harris, who always carried too many keys on his belt. His expression changed immediately when I mentioned the noises. The wrinkles around his eyes deepened. and for a long moment, he didn't answer. Finally, he said, "That apartment's been sealed since '89. Last tenants were a couple who, well, they didn't leave quietly." He didn't say more, but later that evening, Claire looked it up online. An archived article told the story. Charles and Mary Lorne, a married couple found dead in apartment 5C after an apparent domestic dispute. The cause of death differed depending on the source. Some said murder-suicide. Others said they both just stopped breathing, no signs of struggle. And at the end of every report was a strange detail. Neighbors had complained about constant footsteps and muffled voices from the unit the week after the deaths. Footsteps that continued even after the apartment was emptied. Over the next few days, we noticed subtle changes inside our place. Small things at first. The coffee cups we left on the counter switched sides in the morning. A photograph of Claire and me, usually on the bookshelf, had turned backward. Then it escalated. Our couch was moved 3 inches from the wall, exactly as it appeared in one of the crime scene photos we'd seen online. The cushions were arranged differently too, almost as though someone had copied a pattern from somewhere else. One morning, Claire's scarf reappeared draped across our dining chair, tied in a loose knot, just like the widow in the article had been found. That night, we didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the creaking footsteps above again, this time perfectly matching our own breathing rhythms, as if pacing directly over us. When I stood up to shout, silence fell instantly. Then a faint whisper drifted through the ceiling, 2 syllables barely audible. "Still here." Claire begged me to leave the next day, but I wanted proof. I was convinced someone, maybe a squatter, had broken into 5C, so I borrowed a crowbar and returned to the locked door. It opened more easily than expected, the rusted lock snapping with a crunch. Inside, the air was thick, damp, and motionless. Dust hung in the air like ash. The apartment looked frozen in time. 2 chairs overturned, a half-filled ashtray, broken glass scattered on the floor. And on the far wall, smeared in what looked like old rust, were 2 sets of dark handprints. One large, one small. In the middle of the room sat our coffee mugs, the same ones from our kitchen, filled to the brim with water that rippled faintly as somewhere above, unseen steps began again. We left that night, bags half-packed. But before we could close the door, the lights flickered. Shadows stretched along the ceiling once more, 2 tall figures standing perfectly still. Claire whispered my name. When I turned toward her, her face was pale, eyes locked on the mirror near the entrance. In the reflection, we weren't there. Only the 2 figures were, standing together in the ceiling above, staring down through the glass. The landlord says 4C has been empty since then, but new tenants complain that sometimes, late at night, they hear footsteps above them. Steady, heavy, too human to be the pipes, and when they look up, they swear they can see our shadows moving across the ceiling too. For more stories like this, share and subscribe Goofy Horror.